File review packet part 3, more with vocabulary terms. Just trying to decide which one doesn't belong here. And from these terms, congruent is going to mean the same shape. So anything that's exactly the same is going to be equal. These three terms definitely go together. Now, something we learned recently with transformations is about isometries, and that's something that preserves length, which basically means you're cloning this shape. You know, it's the same thing. Now, there's three transformations we could do. One, we can translate it, which means we just move it, or you do a reflection or a rotation. But in either case, you all get the same shape, so that would be the idea of cloning or keeping it all the same, equal, or congruent. As far as supplements go, those are just things that add to 180, so they don't necessarily have to be the same. So you'd have these 5 terms would kind of all mean exactly the same thing. Supplementary does not. As far as this group of terms, if you look at complementary angles, the big idea there is that that's 2 angles that are going to add up to 90 degrees and make yourself a right angle. Now, the only way you can make right angles is with perpendicular lines. Now, as far as bisecting goes, that's just when you take an angle and you split it in half, or you could even take a segment and split it in half and have 2 equal parts, but equal does not necessarily have to be in the same group with all those other guys, right angles, complementary, 90 degrees, and perpendicular. As far as this group goes, when we talk about supplementary angles, again, that's 2 angles that add up to 180. Now, this is exactly what we would refer to as a linear pair, 2 angles that together make a straight line. 2 angles, straight line. Straight angle is obviously 180 degrees, which doesn't look like much of an angle. But when we draw another ray coming out from that, that's a linear pair that's basically forming a straight angle. Now, vertical angles are made when you intersect 2 lines, but they would refer to the angles across from each other, like there or like here. So vertical angles are actually congruent to each other, whereas these other 3 have something to do with adds up to 180. As far as these go, these would be talking about ways to get congruent triangles. So what SSS means, that's side, side, side. It means all 3 triangles, all 3 sides of one triangle match all 3 sides of another triangle. Angle, side, angle would be 2 angles and an included side. Or let me skip over here to angle, angle, side means 2 angles and a non-included side. That would be a side outside from the marked angles. SAS would be 2 sides and the included angle. So SSA would go to mean that's 2 sides and a non-included angle. Oh, that would be a side. So the non-included angle would be there. HL would be in right triangles where you have a hypotenuse congruent to another hypotenuse and a leg congruent to a leg. Like that. But this one here was never a legit way to prove congruent triangles. There was 5 ways to do it, and that wasn't one of them. Moving on to 5, when we talk about translations, reflections, rotations, isometries, and glides, well, these would all be examples of certain types of transformations. A translation is just when you take a shape and you maybe slide it over. A rotation is when you take that shape and you turn it. A reflection is when you take that shape and you might flip it left. You might flip it up and down, but it's pretty much the same shape every time. Now, glide is the same concept as a translation. We're just sliding it up, down, left, right. And every one of these is an example of an isometry because it's all the same shape. Isometry is another word for clone or copy. Where enlargement, well, enlargement would mean to make it bigger, so this is the only one that doesn't keep it the same shape, so this is the only one that doesn't match. Our last set looks like a bunch of angle pairs, And specifically when you talk about parallel lines, like alternate interior angles would be like 4 and 6, and those would be congruent. Corresponding angles would be like 7 and 3, and those would be congruent. As far as the alternate exterior angles, that would be something like 1 and 7, so those are congruent. Vertical angles, in this case you'd have like 6 and 8 would be an example of vertical angles, so those are congruent to each other. Now in general, there's no right angles in this picture, but one thing about right angles, if you draw two of them, they're congruent to each other, whereas the same side interior angles, that would be like these two, where those two are not congruent. These are actually supplementary, so that makes the same side interior angles the one that doesn't match.